Hello and welcome back, and that is right, we are returning to the subject of Plex Media Server, and today we are looking at a Terramaster NAS. We are looking at the T9-423. It is their brand new 9-bay system, and in today's video we're going to be looking at Plex Media Server performance both natively and utilizing transcoding there. We're going to be utilizing the network for a bunch of connections here. We're going to be testing 720p, 1080p and 4K media. We'll also be looking at transcoding in order to simulate remote access and internet access and smaller client device access, something that I will explain in a great deal more detail throughout the course of the video. We are utilizing Plex Pass, as you can see on the right hand side of the screen there, and if we scroll down you'll be able to see that the transcoder has been set to make my CPU hurt, and although it suggests use hardware acceleration when available, it's worth highlighting that this system does have embedded graphics on board with that CPU. This system takes advantage of the N501 CPU inside there, so it does have embedded graphics. It takes advantage of an Intel Celeron processor architecture, quad core, a 2.0 gigahertz that can be burst up to 2.9 gigahertz there, I believe. So again, some lovely hardware in order for us to take advantage of. You can see Plex running there in the background. So again, that is the system we're running. That is what we're taking advantage of today. So let's come out of that. And from here, you can see the files that we're going to be utilizing. And of course, there's Plex Media Server. If we go on the left-hand side of the screen, there is our TNAS, the T9. You can see the network there on 108.108. We're accessing there on our local area network. First test is going to be utilizing the matrix, as it always is, a 720p file. And throughout the course of this video, on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to be able to see the resources being used. We're not going to worry too much about bandwidth because we're on the network. We're not going to worry too much about anything more than the CPU and the RAM. The system arrives with 8 gig of DDR4 already inside, which is nice, but that CPU, it's going to be really interesting to see just how much we're going to be utilizing in terms of resources throughout there. So we're going to leave that nice and easy there so we can see the CPU at the top and the memory there at the bottom. We're not running too many processes there in the background, as you could see, and this video, this first file is a 720p H.264 file, and I'll explain the significance of the H.264 a bit later on, but for now, let's go ahead and play this file here. We'll be able to open up at the bottom of the screen that we are, again, using a 720p file there, running at 0.7 megabits per second, and the file running like a dream. And again, we can go ahead, skip forward, no delays there. This file is being pretty much largely immediately available there on the local area network for us. Very straightforward, very easy. We can skip forward, no lag, no delays. The CPU is not having to break its back or anything there. And again, we're running in original quality. So what about after this? What else can we do? Well, how about if we try some of that lovely transcoding? Let's go and change this from a 720p file right the way down to a 480p file there. It should be near enough instantaneous, and there you go, it did. We didn't see any real noticeable increase there in terms of CPU utilization, and again, we can skip forward, we're still able to play. Now again, as mentioned, why are we going to transcode? Well, transcoding is when a file needs to be reshaped to be better suited to the destination device, whether that is a phone on a train on a limited internet connection, or a laptop in Marbella when you're on holiday accessing your NAS remotely. Just because you own this high quality file, and just because you can watch it for absolutely fine on your local area network, maybe when you're accessing it on your mobile on a beach on the other side of the world, you might not want to access the full 1 gig, 2 gig and higher file. And what you really want for a limited internet connection or a small client device or a device that can't play this original picture quality, what you want is a smaller version of it. And that is where the transcoding comes in. So we've already seen that it can transcode down to 480p very easily. Let's go a little lower. Let's go down to 240p. 240p should make this CPU have to work just a little bit harder there. And again, we're seeing that picture quality drop because we're running at 240p. If this was a small mobile, it would be better. But as you can see, CPU utilization on the right hand side has leapt up significantly. And again, this is what we're going to come to expect during the course of this, particularly when we're using a CPU that has embedded graphics, which for good or for bad is still going to count under CPU utilization. It's just a question of using more or less efficient parts of a CPU, stuff we've talked about in other videos. So if we come out of Plex Media Server there, and this time, not Plex Media Server, we'll come out of the matrix, go back into the films registry, and this time go into Little Shop of Horrors. From here, we're able to look at how well it performs with Little Shop. So again, this is a 1080p H.264, and again, I will highlight why that's important later. But for now, click play. Sorry, accidentally paused it. Get it at the bottom, running at original quality. We can go ahead, skip along. Everything's absolutely fine. No slowdown, no issues. We've still got the spike there from earlier when we did that transcoding element. But for now, things are running fine. So why don't we force a transcode again? This time, we're going to go down from 1080p down to, let's go for an awkward 328p. 328p is a real pain when it comes to transcoding because of the format, the resolution is lesser used, and it's an awkward transition from 1080 to this. As you can see from the CPU utilization, those embedded graphics on board are definitely working hard. If we come out very quickly and go back into the resources being used there in the resource monitor, you're going to be able to see just how hard that system is working. We can see the CPU load, and we can see just how much work is being done there, indeed including a lot of the utilization and heat being generated there. So if we come out of that, or alternatively make our way down to 160p to push things even harder, we're getting a better understanding about this CPU and what it's capable of. We know that it's going to be able to play a lot of these native H.264 files with little or no trouble. But it's when it comes to the transcoding, whether we're going to see if that CPU and its onboard graphics, as well as the efficiency of the NAS system, is up to task. Now, right now we're moving from 1080p down to 160p. That's quite an egregious jump. And you can see the CPU gave it a really good try, but now you can see that it's hanging, and therefore it means that it's just not going to get the job done. So we can come out of that and get ready for our next setup. And this is going to be taking advantage of the Jellyfish test files. These are the same 30-second file from the Jellyfish company, but these Jellyfish 30-second files increase in complexity and resolution and more as we test more. To put it into perspective, if we look at the original files here, you're able to see, if we list them by size, that the smallest version of the file is simply 10.5 megabytes in size, and that's a 3 megabit HD file there. Now, when we get to the end, when we get to the biggest 400 megabits per second 4K Ultra HD 10-bit HDR version, it's 1.4 gigabytes. That's an astronomical jump, and remember, that's still 30 seconds long. Now, as we go through these, the files are going to get more complex, and the NAS is going to have to work harder until we can work out what is the height of this NAS's ability in Plex Media Server. The other thing to highlight is that H.264 and H.265 disparity. H.264 and HEVC, highly efficient video codec, otherwise known as H.265, is a compression technique that allows you to have a movie that was originally created for a wide cinema screen to be compressed into a format that can be watched at home. Compression techniques for media have existed for decades, but the two current most commonly and utilized ones in most people's media collections are H.264 and HEVC, or H.265. H.264 is relatively open source. Anyone can use it, and that's why it plays on everything natively. HEVC, on the other hand, is not as straightforward. It has shared patterns and requires individual licensing, and in some cases it's either too expensive or indeed impossible for some client hardware to apply it to their systems. The result is that a lot of playing of HEVC files results in the client hardware, be it the destination device or a NAS running a media server, needing to convert that file immediately, otherwise known as transcoding, as we saw earlier. The result is that two files that are both 10 megabytes in size have very different outcomes on the CPU resources. Case in point, if we play the H.264 version of this file that's 30 seconds long, it will play natively, as you can see there on the bottom of the screen, in original quality. Ignore the drop in frame rate. That is down to OBS recording here in the background. But as you can see, it buffers all the way along and runs absolutely fine with no mark there on CPU utilization. Now we're going to do the 3 megabits per second HEVC version. And again, both of these files are 10 megabytes in size, as you can see there. We head back. We play back that file, and this time we see a little bit more of a delay when it plays. We can see that it's had to convert automatically, and we can see on the right hand side of the screen CPU utilization has leapt up immediately, and that's the big difference. This CPU, although it's got embedded graphics inside, Plex Media Server and its access to the onboard transcoding, even when I am using a transcoding enabled Plex Pass account, still has to work pretty darn hard, as you can see there. And right now buffering is not outpacing playback, which is going to lead to a freeze screen like this. So right now, based on what we've seen so far, the T9 isn't quite as suitable for that HEVC media as it is for H.264. So for now, let's play all of the H.264s one by one. This is a 10 megabits per second bitrate version of the 30-second file. Buffering has been fine. Original playback. CPU utilization is a little bit of a bump, but nothing to be overly concerned with. Next, let's try a larger file. This time, it's the 30 megabits per second version. We're going to play that there, open up that. Buffering is a little bit slower there on the bottom, but it is still staying ahead, and CPU utilization once again has crept up a little bit more. We exit that. Now we make our way into a heftier 100 megabits per second H.264. And from here, the buffering is going to be even slower as it gets higher, and the utilization there on the right has crept up a little higher. Again, this is a degree every time of getting tougher each time, and indeed, I think this may well be the breaking point. Once again, ignore the drops in frame rate. That is largely to do with OBS there for you guys at home. So the real key here is going to be the next ones. These are 4K versions of these files. This is a 4K Ultra HD version of this file. This is when that CPU is going to have to basically make or break. So let's go ahead and play this. We're playing in original quality in 4K. We're going to see how much buffering it can do, whether it stays ahead or whether it stays in the crash zone, which is here. The crash zone is when the system is trying desperately to convert the file, but it doesn't have the horsepower to get the job done to play it back originally. And as you can see here, we're seeing it freeze, and we're seeing the CPU utilization no longer spike. Now what we can do is convert it. If we convert this file, the system may well be able to do it. It will find a more suitable output for this file, if indeed it can, as we can see from the utilization of the CPU, and play this file in much the same way that we saw it handling those H.265 or HEVC files there. But for now, it doesn't look like we're going to be doing very well, and right now early 4K handling in Plex Media Server is not as good as we'd like to see. Now it may well, oh no, it's kicked us out. 4K media played natively over DLNA via the T9 should be fine, because bear in mind that when you are utilizing a third-party tool, you are adding another layer there between the hardware resources of the NAS and Plex, even if you're using a Plex Pass which has access to hardware transcoding. Finally, we're going to try the 200 megabits per second 4K version. But this time, because we know it probably won't play the original format, we're going to force the system to convert it down to 1080p. So now we're going to let it do its job there. We're going to watch the CPU spike. And now we're going to convert that 4K file down to 1080p at 10 megabits per second bit rate. And right now we're getting as far as 4. It maybe go to 5 to 6, but right now, even if it plays, it's taking longer to buffer than it is going to be to organically play these 5 to 6 seconds of footage. So even though it will play this file, I'd be reluctant to call this a success, and it still didn't. Let's return to those HEVC files we saw earlier on. What's the extent to which we can play an HEVC file here on this NAS? Let's go down to a 10 megabits per second HD highly efficient video codec file. Again, it will automatically convert, as you can see there. It will buffer, and there will be more CPU utilization. But from what we've seen, HEVC files played natively, I say natively, Plex trying to play them natively within the app using the hardware in the NAS has not been deemed that successful. And although, once again, buffering has got far enough for the file to play, I still don't think this is what I would call a success. As this is a 30-second file, now imagine you're watching a 90-minute movie. So again, we're going to let it hit the wall, and we're probably going to see it freeze any second now, and boom, there it is. So again, we're going to go a little higher. We're going to go to the 100 megabits per second version. Again, not really optimistic about this file's chances, but still nonetheless, we can hope for the best. But for now, we're going to hit that wall, and we're going to see similar results, I think. Again, 4K played natively on this NAS has been proven to work, and using 4K via network localized applications and first-party tools in the multimedia server area are still very, very good. It's just a real shame that Terramaster does not provide its own first-party video application. Now, when I moved away from this tab, even though it's playing this, it paused it. Now, if you pause this, then you'll be fine because it'll have time to buffer. But because it's trying to play and buffer at the same time, the system just doesn't have the horsepower to get all of those done. Now, moving down, we can go down to the 4K files, and we'll test a couple more files to end things. We're going to go for a 4K HEVC 10-bit file to see how it fares. This is a make or breaker. Now, bear in mind during the course of these tests that some of the later files that we've been testing in 4K are particularly high-end. Very little or perhaps none of your media collection is going to be this high in quality. We include these because we don't know what the future of home multimedia will be. And for the sake of future-proofing, that's why we include these larger, denser media files. And again, it is giving it a damn fine try, and you've got to respect that. But still, there's no way that this encode here would outpace playback, and as you can see, it's kicked it out. Let's end things on the heftiest file we have. This hefty file here is a 400 megabits per second 4K Ultra HD HEVC 10-bit file. Remember, this is 1.4 gigabytes for 30 seconds of footage. Imagine that as a movie. That's insane. So, although it's at least got this far, I think this would be a case of having to convert the file in advance. Something you can do, with offline transcoding being something you can do, but it will create duplicates of files on your system. But for now, I think even if we try to convert this down to perhaps a 1080p 8 megabit, I can't see this file playing for us here. And on that, I think I'm going to wrap things up. When it comes down to it, the T9 is still a very good NAS. It can definitely handle things proprietary in terms of 1080p and 4K localized streaming. And if Terramaster ever work on their own multimedia tool, we will see benefits there. But as far as Plex Media Server is concerned, I'm not sure I would recommend this NAS for higher than 1080p in terms of future-proofing. More recently released 4K that sometimes live between the 10 and 30 or 40 megabits per second, those files may well play in 4K, but you're still going to see a high CPU utilization. Nonetheless, this is still a good NAS in terms of domestic multimedia. It's just some of that high-end stuff, which I think you're going to have to err towards an Intel Core, a higher-end Pentium, or maybe something towards a graphically enabled Xeon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, visit the links in the description towards other videos we've done on both Terramaster NAS and more specifically on this system. If you want to learn more, click subscribe as we do a video every single day. And on those videos, we cover everything in the world of data storage. Click like if you've enjoyed the videos. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and wrong. And of course, there are links towards the free advice section over on NAS Compares and a link in the description to where you can look for Terramaster NASs in different shops around the world. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.